Representative Eric Swalwell, who is the head of our Future Forum, which goes around the country listening to the concerns of the millennials. He heads up a 30-somethings group, the closest in age to our, some start in the late 20s and 30s, and he's bringing us all together here today. David Price is with us, was the person who originated legislatively the tax deduction for interest on student loans, a professor at Chapel Hill, a member of Congress for a long time, and Brendan Boyle, our colleague from Pennsylvania, who is going to tell us about his student loans and the rest, and again, a champion for our future. Our special guest, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree, are our three special guests. Max Rubin, a George Washington University medical student who will tell his story. Ray M. Pickett, who's advocating for our students, as well as Maggie Thompson. They will give you their credentials. I just wanted to welcome them because the eloquence of their reports will shed light on why what the Republicans are doing is so wrong. It is a ruinous tax scam that devastates students who are the future of our nation and the foundation of our strength. And I thank the students and advocates for speaking out against this disastrous impact of the Ryan McConnell tax scam and because of the effect it will have on their lives. Republicans are saying up and down that they're cutting taxes on the middle class, but that really is not the fact. The Ryan McConnell bill is a middle-class nightmare. It immediately raises taxes on millions of families by an average of $2,000. It raises taxes, again, on the middle class, gives massive tax breaks to the wealthiest and corporations, increases tax incentives for corporations to send jobs overseas. Can you believe that? Did you hear President Trump say that during the campaign, that he was going to give an advantage to corporations to send jobs overseas? But he does. And that's trillions to the deficit, robbing from our children's future. This is a legacy issue for us because it's about the future. And again, I just want to say about education. Nothing brings more money to the Treasury than investing in education. Earliest childhood education, K through 12, higher education, postgrad, lifetime learning for our workers. And this bill is destructive in so many respects. The SALT, the state and local tax deduction, which they are attacking, helps fund our schools. This is very essential to not only the education, but the physical safety of our young people in our communities. How about this one? Try this one on for size. You're a teacher in a school, and you bring supplies, arts and crafts, other needs that the school district just can't afford to supply. Up until now, you got a tax deduction for that. No more in this bill. Why? Why? They are ending lifetime learning credits and tax-free tuition assistance from employers. Employers wanting to train, to educate workers for the jobs of the 21st century, while they're taking that opportunity away. And this is what we're talking about here. Why are they ripping away the lifeline of student loan interest deduction for 12 million graduates? 12 million graduates. Affording an education is hard enough. The bill would be crushing a generation of graduates under a mountain of a generation of graduates under a mountain of debt and cast an even longer shadow over their future. It must be stopped. While at the same time, as they're taking away this opportunity from young people, they are giving new tax breaks to the wealthy and well-connected while cutting off vital tax credits and deductions for students and workers, as I described. They're stealing from the future so they can write a bigger check to corporations, again, to ship jobs overseas. American people deserve real bipartisan tax reform. This is about cuts to taxes for the wealthy and corporate America and cuts in opportunity for the American people. Instead, we should be sitting down, doing this in a bipartisan, thoughtful way, in a way that create growth, which creates good-paying jobs as it reduces the deficit. We call that a better deal. A better deal for better jobs, better wages, and a better future. And now it's my honor to yield the floor to a very special guest from George Washington University, a medical student, Max Rubin. Welcome, Max. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Leader Pelosi. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Max Rubin. I'm a second-year medical student at the George Washington University School of Medicine and also part of the leadership committee for our local American Medical Student Association. I was born and grew up in rural New Mexico, went to New Mexico State University. I was fortunate because I received the state scholarship that allowed me to graduate from New Mexico State debt-free. And this was significant. Both my parents, they were public school teachers in the small town I grew up in. And so despite all of my good fortune is that I'm going to be in approximately $300,000 worth of debt by the end of my medical school tenure. In addition, I plan to go into primary care, which means that it's going to take me a lot longer to pay off my student loans compared to my specialty colleagues. And so I'm here today to ask that Congress not eliminate the tax deduction for interest payments on student loans. I intend to take advantage of this program when I'm a medical resident, working 80 hours a week, making $50,000 a year, and facing a huge pile of debt. More importantly, though, our country is facing a massive shortage of primary care providers, and eliminating this tax deduction would only contribute to the already struggling efforts to provide incentives for primary care. And the shortage, as we all know, it hurts our patients and it overall hampers our healthcare system. And so for me and my medical students, please keep the tax deduction for student loan interest payments. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Representative Swalwell.
Thank you, Max, and thank you, Leader Pelosi and my colleagues. When it comes to young people in America, this tax scam is really about, are we investing in you or are we divesting in you? And this tax plan is the further divesting of young people in America. We've seen it in their budget to eliminate the public interest loan forgiveness program. We see it now in what they're seeking to do with the student loan interest deduction. I chair a group called Future Forum. It's 27 of our youngest House Democrats. And to the young people across the country, we hear you, we are you, and we're for you. We hear you because over the last 2.5 years, we've gone across America, 50 cities, from Omaha to Illinois to Nevada to Fort Worth, Texas. We've spoken to thousands of young people where they gather, at community colleges, at startup workspaces, brew pubs, and coffee houses. And what we've heard from them are they are an inventive, aspirational generation with a lot of anxiety about the future. The future is hard enough for them with automation fears and seeing jobs go overseas and their parents themselves struggling to get by. The future's hard enough without this assault on one of the few ways that they're able to get by. So we hear them. We are them. Our members are as diverse as this generation. We have Latinos, African Americans, members of the LGBTQ community, men and women who were veterans and small business owners. And we ourselves have a lot of student loan debt. I have just under $100,000 today. I rent in the community where I grow up, hoping that I can come out of the student loan debt and one day eventually buy with my wife and our son. We are this generation, and we're for this generation. We're for it in what we have proposed to expand, actually, the student loan interest deduction from $2,500 as it is today to $5,000 and to lift the income cap, but also what we will fight for. We're going to do everything we can to oppose this tax scam that the GOP is putting forward. Because we know it's not only young people who it hurts. What we've heard as we've gone across the country is that when it comes to young people and their future, their issues are a family matter. So often today, young people, because it's so expensive to rent near where they work or to pay off their student debt, they're moving back home with mom and dad. And as baby boomers age and their own parents live longer, they're finding that their own parents are moving in with them too. You're seeing multiple generations living in the same household. So if you take this deduction that 12 million young people took in 2015, that's hundreds of dollars in their pocket away. You don't just hurt them. Chances are you're hurting their parents. So we're going to fight it. And we need young people to join us. And so that's what we're asking for today, and we're seeking to continue to enlist them wherever we go. And finally, I just want to say, our members are going to continue to engage on this issue. And later this week, we're rolling out our higher education plan, because we think it's not just opposing these tax scams, but there's a lot of ideas out there that we can put forward to invest in young people. I'm excited that today we're joined by Sue Ann Pickett, who is here, and she is from Ohio, and she works in nonprofits, and she also, I hope, can talk a little bit about the incentives to go into nonprofits that the Trump administration has proposed to take away. So it's Ray Ann Pickett from Ohio, local nonprofit worker. Thank you, Ray.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Representative Swalwell. My name is Ray Ann Pickett. I'm 33 years old, a mom to two rambunctious boys who are 2 and 4 years old, a stepmom, a wife, and a worker. 14 years ago, I borrowed private and federal loans to help me pay for college. I graduated with my bachelor's degree and $75,000 in student loan debt. I began repaying my loans when my 6-month grace period ended. I had a low-paying job, so I waited tables at night. I didn't have enough money for loans and rent, so I slept on my friends' couches. I paid as much as I could, as often as possible. Like many, my payments were over $1,000 a month, with a large portion of the payments going towards interest only. During those years when I was establishing my career, the student loan interest rate deduction meant that I had a light at the end of a dark tunnel of repayment and from the astronomical unfixed interest rates on my private loans. Over the last 10 years, I have repaid over $96,000, much of that going towards interest. Towards the end of 2016, I lost my job, and my husband and I made the difficult decision to stop repayment on my student loans until I found one, which I have today. Today, my loans are in default, but I expect to be back on course in the next few months. I have come to terms with the fact that these student loans will always be with me, and they might never be paid off. The deduction I received for many years was critical to my survival, and will be again. $33 a month may not amount to a big deal to lawmakers who make enough money to survive, but for my family, it is the difference between turning the heat on in November or waiting another month, between buying vegetables and fresh fruit for my kids to eat or not, and between affording childcare or not, between having the American dream or not. I urge my elected officials to not only keep the student loan interest rate deduction, but to improve and double it, not just for me, my children, and my family, but for the millions of people just like us. And now I'd like to turn it over to Representative Price. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Thank you, Rayanne. Thanks to all who are here and for your interest in what we're doing, which is trying to blow the whistle on this scam of a tax plan, raising taxes on millions of middle-class families, slashing taxes for the wealthiest people in the country and for large corporations, and then having the gall, as President Trump says, I guess with a straight face, this is a tax plan for the middle class. Give me a break. What we're talking about here today is Exhibit A of why this is a tax plan that targets the middle class, targets the breaks that ordinary families have counted on to make it in this country, and certainly to make it in the demanding world of seeking and paying for higher education and professional training. Now, I did author this provision back in 1997, and I relax. I will not give any war stories about how that happened. It was interesting. It's quite an effort. It was during a period when we were doing a general budget, one of these big budget deals, and an overall tax plan, and it came by me, I think, as a North Carolinian and as coming from a family steeped in education. My parents were both teachers. I taught at the college level myself. I'm a parent of college students who incurred loan obligations. And there were many collaborators. You can read about it in my book. I wrote it up. Collaborators, Bob Etheridge, a former superintendent of public instruction, Martin Lancaster, a dear friend. There were a group of us who got together and said, let's do something in this tax plan for education. Ordinary folks need a break here. And a lot's happened since then. The average loan obligations of students coming out of college has increased. We, in the Obama administration, addressed this in some serious ways. We got rid of the middleman that was skimming off so much of the student loan money. We have provided more generous, more sensible, I think, repayment terms, especially for people going into public service jobs. We've improved the grant to loan ratio, increasing the Pell Grants. All this is a work in progress, and more needs to be done. More needs to be done. Debt loads are very severe, as you're hearing here today. But throughout all this, this deduction for the interest on these loans has been a constant. It's a modest tax break, but it's an important one, and it's been something that we've been able to count on. I had no idea that of all the things that the Republicans might want to target, that to come in here, to come to us here in this rushed, almost frantic process, and to ask parents and young workers to pay for tax reform. I mean, how absurd is that? It's borrowing from the future to pay for millions of dollars in tax giveaways for the well-connected and for large corporations. It's not acceptable, and that's why we're blowing the whistle on it today. And it's why I'm happy to turn next to another person who can testify very persuasively on this subject, Maggie Thompson.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Leader Pelosi, Representative Swalwell, Representative Boyle, Representative Price for doing that back then, but also all of you for having me to speak today and being such great champions for our generation overall. My name is Maggie Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of Generation Progress. We're the youth engagement arm of the Center for American Progress, and we work with and for the millennial generation, the largest and most diverse generation in American history. In short, the Ryan McConnell tax plan is good news for the rich and terrible news for the rest of us. The top 1% of Americans would receive more than half of the benefits of this deficit-funded tax cut, and it will undermine our generation's ability to achieve any sort of economic stability, never mind prosperity, for decades to come. Our generation is already struggling under the weight of an unprecedented student debt crisis, $1.4 trillion with a T, in student debt, the majority of which is held by millennials. This tax plan will make it even harder for people to pay down their loans. The student loan interest deduction is a vital program. It allows individuals to write off $2,500 in the interest that they pay on their loans. I relied on this program every year when I was paying off my student debt. Thank you again, Representative Price. It's one of the many programs that our country invested in me and other students in, and it's what allowed me to enter public service and work in government and work in a nonprofit. In 2015, 12.4 million people took advantage of this program. It saves the average borrower over $200 a year. But I would also say that this is just one program in this huge tax plan that it's really the tip of the iceberg with how this proposal will undermine our ability to afford college and pay off our debt in a way that's sustainable. As the other speakers have mentioned, it ends the lifelong learning credit. It takes away incentives for our employers to invest in educational opportunities for us as employees. And it gets rid of the state and local tax deduction, which would really hurt the ability of our state states and cities to adequately fund public education. So let's be clear about what's happening here. This tax plan will pay for massive tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires at the expense of our generation. These cuts have to be paid for somehow. Millennials are already struggling. Student debt is stifling our ability to purchase homes or start businesses. A lot of people don't know, but the millennial generation has the lowest level of entrepreneurship in American history. Instead of investing in us, proposals like this invest in the super wealthy. And if Republicans really want to help the working class, they need to reject policies in this tax bill that put millionaires and billionaires in front of our generation. I'm going to turn it over to our last speaker, Representative Boyle, before the question and answer.
Well, thank you. As one of the, just wait a second. As one of the younger members of Congress, it's probably not surprising to learn that I also have student loan debt. As one of actually the first in my family to go to college, getting a whole sort of collection of different smaller scholarships, work study, and student loans was part of the package that enabled me to go to college and be the first in my family to attend and to graduate. I'm now about 15 years in repayment, still have a little under $50,000 left to go, and my hope is to have it paid off entirely by the time my daughter, who is now 3, ends up being 18, and I'm paying for her college tuition. Now, and having said all that, I consider myself one of the fortunate ones. And clearly, by the standards of our society, I am, because I've been able to have opportunities that my parents didn't have. But we have to take a step back as a society and say, is it really fair, and does it make sense that we are saddling an entire generation, and now going on 2 generations, of such a massive debt burden, especially at a time when an access to a higher education is more important than ever before? Consider the statistics that were just cited earlier. Aggregate student loan debt in this country is just over $1.4 trillion. It, not that long ago, surpassed all of the credit card debt combined in America. And in fact, it is now growing at such a level, it will soon be double all of the credit card debt held in America. There was one economist report not too long ago, cited by Forbes magazine, that called the student loan debt crisis in America the next ticking time bomb, analogizing it to the real estate bubble of a decade ago. So this is a problem that stretches well beyond those who are currently in college, those who are currently in repayment. And I was really struck, representing part of the city of Philadelphia and part of the Philadelphia suburbs. I represent a very diverse district socioeconomically. I have some struggling lower income neighborhoods. I have some very affluent areas, some of the most affluent zip codes in the entire state of Pennsylvania. And I was always struck when I'm out in the district and before when I was campaigning, even if I was in a lower income zip code or higher income zip code, when I talked about the worry that families have if they can afford college for their kids, I saw heads nodding in equal number, regardless of race, ethnicity, or even socioeconomic status. It is wrong what we're doing as a society. Now, having said all that, I come here to Congress hoping to be part of crafting a solution. Never did I really imagine that I would have to be standing here defending the student loan interest deduction. I have never once had a constituent come up to me and say, you know, Brendan, I find that it is too easy to repay my student loans. Please make it a little bit more difficult. And to know that the other side, having just waged the campaign almost exactly a year ago, going around to areas like my state of Pennsylvania, convincing working-class Pennsylvanians and working-class Americans that they were on their side, and then to come up with a tax plan, 79.7% of which goes to the richest 1%, the majority of which goes to the wealthiest 1/10 of 1%, and in order to pay for that, eliminates things like this deduction for repaying student loans and raises taxes on 49 million middle-class Americans. It is wrong. It is Robin Hood in reverse, and we must fight back. So that is why we're here today to, as Congressman Price pointed out and Leader Pelosi pointed out, to raise awareness on this scam and fraud that is about to be sold to the American people. And I am confident that with the American people joining us, we can fight back and save the student loan interest deduction. With that, we'll do Q&A and return it now to our leader, Ms. Pelosi.
Thank you. All of you. Wonderful. On behalf of my colleagues, I thank Max Rubin, Rayanne Pickett, and Maggie Thompson for their presentations today and express gratitude to our visionary Congressman Price for putting this in motion in the middle of the 1990s with Congressman Etheridge and Congressman Martin Lancaster. This is a North Carolina pride moment. Any questions on this subject first? Any questions on this subject first? Let me just add, you heard the case that was made personally. Afford to supply. Up until now, you've got a tax deduction. And legislatively by our colleagues and our guest. But this is, I want to make one further point. Nothing, again, as I said earlier, brings more money to the Treasury. Nothing reduces the national debt more than the investment in education. Early childhood, K through 12, higher education, post-grad, lifetime learning. And in almost every level in their budget and in this tax plan, the Republicans have made an assault on that. And that is about the aspirations of the American people, helping them reach their fulfillment. It's also about keeping America #1 in the world because everything, whether it's research and development, invention, innovation, begins in the classroom. So this is central to who we are as a nation, an informed electorate, people reaching their aspirations, helping keep our country on the forefront, militarily keeping us strong, economically keeping us #1, and in every way making the future better. So just, again, ask if there are any questions about this particular provision in the bill. None? Okay. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.